Back in 1950, CFR member James Warburg testified before the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. During his testimony, he stated bluntly, "We shall have world government whether or not you like it by conquest or consent." Warburg was in a position to know. His father, Paul Warburg, was responsible for creating the most important tool of global government ever devised, the Federal Reserve. Paul Warburg was so highly respected as a financier that he was tapped by Senator Nelson Aldrich to author a study on discounting commercial bills. Aldrich, John D. Rockefeller Jr.'s father-in-law, was the chairman of the Senate Finance Committee. His committee was charged with developing a central banking scheme for the United States, ostensibly to forestall the financial panics that regularly plagued the U.S. economy at the turn of the century. The United States at that time suffered from periodic liquidity crises engineered largely by the financial community. The bankers argued that it was due to the rigid nature of the currency supply. In those days, in order to make a loan, the banks were actually required to have the cash money on deposit. The bankers argued that adequate money supplies could not be funneled in time to the industries that needed it most. Sounds sensible when you hear the bankers argue it, but the argument quickly loses weight when you realize its implications. Held up against the light of true intentions, here's what it means. We want to be able to charge you interest for loans made with money we don't have. So we want you to lend it to us for free first. To ensure that the population got the message, a series of currency shortages were engineered by those who wanted this lucrative central banking scheme. Since the entire banking system was not yet under a central authority, the panics were generally localized in predetermined geographic locations across the states. A large bank or group of cooperating banks would restrict credit to farmers and businesses. As a result, industries were often unable to finance inventories or farmers get their crops to market. Many went under. Such failures had a ripple effect. Grain rotting in the fields meant a shortage of livestock feed. Higher feed prices forced many livestock producers into bankruptcy. Fewer livestock producers drove the price of meat through the roof. Business failures often weakened other related industries. The creation of the Federal Reserve was a masterpiece of management by engineered crisis. The pressure on Wall Street caused markets to plunge, forcing smaller, weaker banks to fail. The destruction of the smaller, weaker banking competitors provided two benefits. One is the obvious. Fewer independent banks meant fewer but larger slices of the pie. Secondly, a small number of big banks are much easier to regulate or control than are larger numbers of independents. The engineered crises, therefore, provided a payday on several fronts. And after every one of these crises, there were fewer competitors and more brought out of the survivors under the control of the Federal Reserve. The bankers who engineered the crises argued that a central banking scheme would eliminate financial panics. They reasoned that all that was needed was the opportunity for the bankers to lend more money than they actually had, at interest. Creating money in this way would enable industry to buy now and pay later when they realized their profits. Of course, for the scheme to work, there would have to be a centralized control of the banking system, which is exactly what they wanted. Paul Warburg was a German immigrant from Hamburg, Germany. He was the son of an enormously wealthy banking family. Early on, he was recognized as an economic prodigy. At only 18, he was employed by the London headquarters of the Rothschild banking empire. In 1895, Warburg married Nina Loeb, another offspring of a Rothschild-backed banking dynasty. In 1901, the couple moved to New York. He was immediately offered a partnership in his father-in-law's firm of Kuhn and Loeb, one of the Wall Street's most prestigious firms. Soon after entering the world of American-style banking, Warburg began to set in motion a plan for a central bank. Some conspiracy theorists claim Warburg was given marching orders to establish a central bank in the United States while he was still apprenticing in the Rothschild Group in London. There's no direct evidence to establish that as a fact, but it is plausible, especially in the light of the fact that the Rothschild Group had been attempting to establish a central bank system in the United States since the American Revolution. In 1910, Paul Warburg began working with Senator Aldrich on the Federal Reserve Act. It was yet another effort to create a central bank of issue in the United States. Even the name is ingeniously deceptive because the organization is not under the control of our federal government, and its reserves are not secured by anything of intrinsic value, just credits backed by fiat paper money from our Treasury. The act was put before the House of Representatives on December 23rd, 1913, when most of the members of the Congress were home for Christmas. It passed without a legal voting quorum present. It was signed into law in their absence by President Woodrow Wilson. The act placed the constitutional power of Congress to regulate the U.S. economy into the hands of mostly foreign private bankers. After the vote, Congressman Charles Lindbergh told Congress, "This act establishes the most gigantic trust on earth. When the president signs this act, the invisible government by the money power, proven to exist by the money trust investigation, will be legalized. The new law will create inflation whenever the trust want inflation." President Wilson lived to lament this fiasco over which he presided. As he wrote shortly before his death, "I am a most unhappy man. I have unwittingly ruined my country. A great industrial nation is controlled by its system of credit. Our system of credit is concentrated. The growth of the nation, therefore, and all our activities are in the hands of a few men. We have come to be one of the worst ruled, one of the most completely controlled and dominated governments in the civilized world. No longer a government by free opinion, no longer a government by conviction and the vote of the majority, but a government by the opinions and duress of a small group of dominant men." Wow. It's not surprising that the first governor of the Fed was Paul Warburg, who was by then a naturalized U.S. citizen. Here's one of the most amazing facts of this infamous period of American history. During World War I, at the very time that Paul Warburg headed the U.S. Federal Reserve, his brother Max headed the German Secret Service, and Sir William Weissman, a partner in the Wall Street banking firm of Warburg, Kuhn and Loeb, was the head of the British intelligence. So members of the Warburg family ably played both sides of the street. Today, the Council on Foreign Relations, born in America, financed by Americans, comprised of the best and brightest America has to offer, seeks to destroy America and sell it into slavery under the domination of a coming one world government. You talk about playing both sides of the street. The old game continues, but now the stakes bear catastrophic and eternal consequences.